when my son Derek handed me his cafe blueprints and demanded a $150,000 check. I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The property address was 1247 Riverside Avenue, and I knew something about that land that would let me destroy him completely. "Just write the check and stay out of it, Dad," he said dismissively. He had no idea I was about to teach him the most brutal lesson of his life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I spread Derek's cafe blueprints across my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped with math homework 30 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Back then, he'd hang on every word when I explained how cities worked, how buildings fit together like puzzle pieces, how zoning laws existed for good reasons. Now, at 71, with 4 decades of city planning under my belt, I was apparently too obsolete to offer an opinion on his dream project. The plan showed a 2,400 square foot cafe on Riverside Avenue, complete with outdoor seating and what Derek called artisanal coffee culture. I'd walked that street every morning for 15 years. I knew every setback requirement, every environmental restriction, every reason why 3 previous restaurants had failed on that exact corner. But Derek didn't want to hear about any of that. "Dad, you there?" His voice carried that particular edge of impatience reserved for people he considered slow. "I need that check today. The permits won't wait." I studied the site plan one more time, noting the proposed parking layout that violated municipal code by at least 6 feet. The outdoor seating encroached on the required green space buffer. The kitchen ventilation system faced directly toward the elementary school next door, guaranteeing complaints that would shut them down within months. 40 years of watching entitled developers make these exact mistakes, and here was my own son, walking straight into the same trap. "Derek, before we talk money, let's discuss these setback requirements. See this line here? That's not decorative. The city requires 15 feet from the property line for any permanent structure, but your patio—" Jesus Christ, Dad. He snatched the blueprints away from me like I was contaminating them. This isn't 1982. We have actual professionals handling this stuff now. Architects who went to school this century. Engineers who understand modern building codes. The dismissal hit harder than I expected. I designed half the commercial district downtown, guided 3 mayors through urban renewal projects, and turned a failing industrial corridor into a thriving arts district that Derek loved to frequent. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore. "I'm just saying, son, I've seen these mistakes before. The Murphy family tried the exact same layout in '03, and the city shut them down after 6 months. Cost them everything. If you just listen to what? Stories about the good old days when you actually mattered." Derek's wife Lisa shifted uncomfortably beside him, but she didn't intervene. "Look, I appreciate everything you did back in your day, but this is a new era. We have technology now, computer modeling, environmental impact studies. We don't need gut feelings from someone whose biggest project was probably a strip mall. My biggest project was a central library renovation that won 3 state awards and brought $2 million in federal grants to the city." But I didn't bother correcting him. The contempt in his voice made it clear that facts wouldn't change his mind. "So let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level. "You want me to write a check for $150,000, but you don't want to look at the plans. You don't want my advice. You don't want my experience. You just want my money." Finally, he gets it. Derek grinned at Lisa, like I just solved a particularly difficult riddle. "Look, Dad, I know your feelings are hurt, but this isn't about you. This is about us building something amazing, something modern, something that doesn't need to be filtered through 40-year-old regulations and small-town thinking." Lisa nodded along, though I caught her glancing nervously at the blueprints. She'd always been the smarter of the two, but Derek's confidence was infectious. When he talked about their vision and their modern approach, even sensible people started believing that somehow this time would be different. "Let us do something modern for once," Derek continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Just write your check and stay out of it. We'll handle the complicated stuff." The complicated stuff. Like I hadn't been handling complicated stuff since before he was born. Like I hadn't navigated federal regulations and state bureaucracy and municipal politics for most of my adult life. Like 40 years of professional experience was somehow less valuable than whatever his 28-year-old architect had learned in graduate school. I walked to my desk and pulled out my checkbook, feeling their eyes follow me. Derek straightened up, anticipating victory. Lisa smiled that relieved smile of someone who'd been worried about family drama, but was now seeing it resolve in their favor. 150,000, I said, writing carefully, for the son who thinks his father's expertise is worthless. Dad, don't be dramatic. You know we appreciate. Do you? I tore off the check, but held on to it. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you appreciate my bank account a lot more than you appreciate me. Derek's face flushed, but he held out his hand for the check anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. I handed it over, watching him fold immediately and slip it into his wallet. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the sacrifice. No recognition that this represented months of my pension payments. Just the satisfied look of someone who'd gotten what they came for. You won't regret this, Dad, Lisa said, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as me. This cafe is going to be incredible. Derek has such a vision for the space. Derek's vision. Right. I'd been studying that particular piece of real estate for longer than Derek had been legally allowed to drink, but somehow his vision was more valuable than my knowledge. I'm sure it will be, I said, walking them to the door. I'm sure you'll both learn a lot from this experience. After they left, I sat back down at my kitchen table and spread out a different set of papers, documents I'd been reviewing for the past month, maps and zoning reports and development proposals that Derek's modern professionals apparently hadn't bothered to research. Because here's what my son didn't know, what his expensive architects hadn't discovered, what his technological approaches and computer modeling had somehow missed. The city council was 3 weeks away from approving a massive commercial expansion along Riverside Avenue. Property values were about to triple. Development rights were about to shift dramatically. And the family who'd been trying to sell the lots adjacent to Derek's cafe had just accepted my offer. Derek wanted me to stay out of his business. He wanted me to write checks and keep my obsolete opinions to myself. He wanted to prove that his modern approach was superior to my old-fashioned knowledge. Fine. I'd give him exactly what he asked for. I'd let him learn the way all entitled developers learn. The expensive way. But I had one card to play that they didn't know about. And when the time came, they discovered that sometimes the old ways work precisely because they've been tested by time. Sometimes experience matters more than enthusiasm. Sometimes the father knows better than the son, even if the son is too arrogant to listen. Derek thought he was playing checkers. But I'd been playing chess for 40 years, and I was already 3 moves ahead. That evening, Martha found me in my study, surrounded by financial records and old tax returns. I'd been documenting every loan, every gift, every time Derek had come to us with his hand out and his promises of eventual repayment. "Hank, what's all this?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. After 43 years of marriage, she could read my moods like weather patterns, and the storm clouds were definitely gathering. "Just reviewing our son's payment history," I said, holding up the college loan documents. "Remember when Derek needed $45,000 for his education? Promised he'd pay it back within 5 years of graduation?" Martha's face tightened. That was different. College is an investment in... "It's been 8 years, Martha. 8 years, and we haven't seen a dime." I pulled out another folder. Then there was a wedding. $25,000 for what Lisa called the perfect day. Derek said they'd reimburse us from their gift money. They were young, starting out. It's normal for parents to help. And the house down payment. I slapped the paperwork onto the desk. $30,000 so they could buy in the right neighborhood. Derek swore they'd refinance within 2 years and pay us back. That was 3 years ago. Martha walked around the desk to look at the totals I calculated. $100,000 in loans that had never been repaid. Interest-free loans that Derek had never even acknowledged as loans, treating them instead like gifts he was entitled to receive. "You're keeping score now?" she asked quietly. "I'm recognizing patterns." I pulled out Derek's phone records from when he called about the cafe funding. Look at this conversation log. 27 minutes of him explaining why he needed the money. 3 minutes total devoted to thanking me or acknowledging the sacrifice. 0 minutes spent asking for my professional opinion about the viability of his business plan. The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Derek's name appeared on the caller ID. Dad, I just wanted to follow up on our conversation today. Derek's voice carried that fake cheerfulness of someone who needed something else. Lisa and I were talking, and we realized we should probably get that money transferred as soon as possible. The construction crew wants to start Monday. I put the call on speaker, so Martha could hear. Construction crew? Derek, you haven't even filed your permits yet. That's all handled, Dad. Like I said, we have professionals managing the process now. Modern professionals who understand how to expedite these things. Martha shot me a warning look, but I pressed on. Son, I've been in this business for 40 years. You can't start construction without approved permits. The city will shut you down on day one. Jesus. Dad, there you go again with the doom and gloom. Derek's voice took on that familiar edge of irritation. This isn't the Stone Age. We have expedited review processes now. Digital submissions. Same-day approvals for qualified projects. Same-day approvals. Right. I'd worked with the planning department for 4 decades. They never approved a commercial project in less than 6 weeks, and that was with perfect paperwork and no complications. Derek, listen to me. I know these people. I know the system. If you start construction without proper permits, you know the old system, Dad, the system from when you were relevant. Derek's tone shifted from irritation to condescension. Look, I appreciate that you used to be important in this town, but things have changed. The people running things now actually understand modern development. Martha's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. She'd heard this tone before, seen this pattern of casual disrespect that Derek had perfected over the years. Besides, Derek continued, we've already committed to the contractor. If we don't transfer that money tomorrow, we'll lose our slot in his schedule. Do you want to be responsible for delaying our opening by 6 months? There it was. The guilt trip, the subtle threat, the implication that any problems will be my fault for not funding his mistakes quickly enough. I'll make the transfer, I said quietly. But Derek, please, just once, listen to someone who knows what he's talking about. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. The relief in his voice was palpable. And hey, don't worry so much. Everything's going to work out perfectly. After he hung up, Martha and I sat in silence for several minutes. He doesn't even hear himself, she said finally. The way he talks to you. He hears himself fine, I replied, turning back to my computer. He just doesn't care. I pulled up my contact list and scrolled through names I hadn't called in months. Former colleagues from the planning department, old friends from the mayor's office, people who still knew how the city really worked, as opposed to how Derek's modern professionals thought it worked. What are you doing? Martha asked. Research, I said, dialing the first number. If Derek wants to learn the hard way, I'm going to make sure I have a front row seat. The phone rang twice before Tom Brennan picked up. Tom had been the assistant planning director when I retired, and now he ran the whole department. Hank Bellamy. How the hell are you, old friend? Tom, I need a favor. Can you tell me the status of any permits filed for 1247 Riverside Avenue? Hold on, let me check. I heard keyboard clicking in the background. Yeah, here it is. Derek Bellamy filed preliminary paperwork last week. Lots of problems with the application, though. Setback violations, environmental concerns, parking insufficiency. We sent it back for major revisions. When did you send it back? 3 days ago. Certified mail. Should have received it by now. I thanked Tom and hung up, then immediately dialed Derek's number. Dad, did you make the transfer yet? Derek, did you receive any mail from the planning department this week? Long pause. What kind of mail? The kind that explains why your permits were rejected and what you need to fix before resubmission. Another pause, longer this time. Look, Dad, There were some minor technical issues, but our architect says they're easy fixes. Nothing that should delay the project. Minor technical issues. 40 years of watching developers downplay permit problems, and now my own son was speaking their language. How minor? I asked. Just look, it's complicated. You wouldn't understand the technical aspects. I wouldn't understand. The man who'd guided more development projects than Derek, had attended college classes, wouldn't understand the technical aspects of a simple cafe permit. Derek, those minor issues are going to cost you months of delays and thousands in redesign fees. If you just listened to me from the beginning. Dad, I don't have time for this. The money, okay? Can you transfer it tonight? I hung up without answering and turned back to my computer. 40 years of watching entitled developers learn expensive lessons, and now my own son thought he was smarter than zoning law. Well, Derek wanted to be treated like any other developer. Fine, I'd give him exactly what he asked for. I started making calls to my old contacts, asking about available properties near Riverside Avenue. Because if Derek was determined to fail, I was going to make sure that failure served a purpose. Martha watched me work, understanding dawning in her eyes. You're not trying to help him anymore, are you? She asked. I'm helping him, I said, dialing another number. I'm helping him learn what happens when you treat expertise like ignorance and wisdom like weakness. Hank. 40 years, Martha. 40 years I've been watching people like Derek crash and burn because they think experience doesn't matter. Well, maybe it's time my own son learned why experience matters. The phone connected, and I smiled as I recognized a voice on the other end. Evening, Rebecca. It's Hank Bellamy. I hear you might have some property for sale on Riverside Avenue. 2 weeks later, Martha was setting the table for Sunday dinner when Derek and Lisa arrived with Derek's business partner, Kyle Morrison. Kyle was one of those guys who'd made money in tech and now thought that success translated to expertise in everything else. Designer jeans, expensive watch, and the kind of confident ignorance that only comes from never having failed at anything important. Uncle Hank. Kyle called out, though we weren't related. He'd started calling me that after Derek told him it would help with the family dynamics of their business arrangement. Hope you don't mind me crashing your family dinner. Derek thought it would be good for me to meet the legendary city planner. Legendary. The way he said it made it sound like a fairy tale character rather than a professional title. Kyle's been handling all the permit stuff, Derek announced as we sat down to Martha's pot roast. Turns out having connections in the tech industry really helps with navigating government bureaucracy. Everything's digital now, streamlined, much more efficient than the old paper-based systems. I cut into my roast and said nothing. Tom Brennan had called me that morning to let me know Derek's permits had been rejected for the second time. Apparently, their streamlined digital approach had managed to submit plans that violated 3 separate municipal codes and forgot to include an environmental impact assessment entirely. The best part, Kyle continued, gesturing with his fork, is that we don't have to deal with all those old-school bureaucrats who love to throw around their authority. The new online system cuts right through the red tape. Martha raised an eyebrow. Hank worked with the planning department for 40 years. I'm sure he could offer some insights about how the process actually works. Oh, I'm sure he could, Kyle said with a patronizing smile. But that's kind of the problem, isn't it? The people who've been doing things the old way for decades are usually the most resistant to innovation. No offense, Uncle Hank, but sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that experience blinds you to. Fresh eyes. Right. I've been watching fresh eyes crash and burn against municipal regulations since Kyle was in elementary school. Plus, Derek added, Kyle's got connections at City Hall. People who understand that economic development should be encouraged, not strangled by outdated regulations. I nearly choked on my wine. Connections at City Hall? Derek, who exactly do you think you're connected to? Kyle leaned forward conspiratorially. Let's just say we know people who know people. The kind of people who can make things happen when there's mutual benefit involved. The kind of people who know people. I'd heard that line from every amateur developer who thought city government worked like a buddy system, usually right before they discovered that actual regulations didn't care about their networking skills. So the permits are all approved? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Well, technically they're still in review, Derek said quickly. But our sources indicate it's just a formality at this point. All the real decision makers are on board with the project. Our sources, Kyle's connections, were probably some junior staff members he'd met at a Chamber of Commerce mixer, but Derek was treating it like inside information from the mayor's office. That's interesting, I said, because I heard there were some issues with the setback requirements, and something about environmental concerns. Kyle waved dismissively. Minor paperwork stuff. The kind of technicalities that old-fashioned planners obsess over, but that don't really matter in the real world. We're talking about a coffee shop, not a nuclear power plant. The environmental concerns were about stormwater runoff that would flood the elementary school playground during heavy rains. But Kyle apparently considered children's safety a technicality that old-fashioned planners obsessed over. The important thing, Derek said, is that we're thinking big picture. Creating jobs, attracting foot traffic, revitalizing the whole corridor. That's what modern city planning is about. Economic impact, not arbitrary rules written 50 years ago. Arbitrary rules, like the ones that prevented buildings from collapsing and businesses from poisoning their neighbors. But I'd learned that Derek wasn't interested in hearing about the reasons behind regulations, only in finding ways around them. Lisa had been quiet through most of the conversation, but now she spoke up. Maybe we should listen to Hank's concerns. He does know this stuff better than anyone. That's exactly the problem, Kyle said, turning to face her. No offense to your father-in-law, but expertise in outdated systems isn't really expertise, is it? It's like being an expert in rotary phones when everyone's moved on to smartphones. The comparison hung in the air like a slap. 40 years of professional experience reduced to a rotary phone metaphor by someone who'd probably never read a zoning ordinance in his life. Kyle, Martha said quietly, I think you might be underestimating what Hank brought to this community over the years. Oh, I'm not underestimating anything, Kyle replied with that confident smile. I'm sure Uncle Hank was great at what he did back in his day. But that day is over, you know? The world's moved on. Government's moved on. Business has moved on. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is help them accept that their time has passed. Their time has passed. I looked around the table at my family, watching their reactions. Lisa looked uncomfortable. Martha looked angry. Derek looked like he was enjoying the show. Besides, Kyle continued, apparently oblivious to the tension he created, Derek and I aren't just building a cafe. We're building a lifestyle brand, a community hub, the kind of forward-thinking business that attracts the demographic this town needs to survive in the 21st century. The demographic this town needs. Kyle had lived here for exactly 18 months, but he'd already decided what kind of people deserve to call a home. We'd got marketing partnerships lined up with 3 local influencers. Derek added excitedly, Instagram campaigns, TikTok promotions, the whole social media ecosystem. This isn't your grandfather's coffee shop. No, it wasn't. My grandfather's coffee shop would have had proper permits before breaking ground. But apparently that was old-fashioned thinking. After dinner, Kyle cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping Martha with the dishes. Look, Uncle Hank, I hope I didn't come across as disrespectful earlier. I actually have a lot of admiration for what you accomplished in your career. But you have to understand, Derek's really sensitive about feeling like he's living in your shadow. Living in my shadow. As if offering professional advice was somehow an attack on Derek's independence. He needs to prove he can succeed on his own terms, Kyle continued, with his own methods, his own vision. Sometimes it means rejecting the old ways, even when they come from someone you love and respect. The old ways, like following building codes and obtaining proper permits. Revolutionary concepts that someone like Kyle couldn't be expected to understand. I appreciate your concern for Derek, I said carefully. But some things don't change just because technology advances. Gravity still works the same way. Water still flows downhill. And buildings still need to meet safety standards. Kyle laughed. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You're thinking like a regulator instead of an innovator. Sometimes you have to break a few rules to create something truly special. break a few rules. I'd spent 40 years watching people break rules and then act surprised when the consequences broke them back. After they left, Martha and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "That Kyle is quite a piece of work," she said. "Derek chose him as a business partner." I replied, "That tells you everything you need to know about Derek's judgment. Are you really going to let them fail?" I thought about the phone call I'd received 3 days earlier. The one from my contact at the Regional Planning Commission. The one about the commercial expansion project that would transform Riverside Avenue from a quiet residential street into a major retail corridor. The one that Derek and Kyle knew nothing about because they were too busy disrupting old-fashioned planning processes to actually research the area they were investing in. "I'm not letting them do anything," I said finally. "They're adults. They've made it very clear that they don't want my input. So I'm giving them exactly what they asked for, the freedom to succeed or fail on their own terms." What I discovered 3 days earlier would change everything. But Derek had made it clear that he didn't want to hear about changes, especially from someone whose time had passed. So I'd let him discover those changes the same way he was discovering everything else about the development business. The expensive way. Martha squeezed my hand. "You're planning something, aren't you?" I smiled, thinking about the property listings I'd been reviewing, the real estate agents I'd been calling, the opportunities that were about to present themselves along Riverside Avenue. "I'm planning to give my son exactly what he wants," I said. "The chance to prove that experience doesn't matter. That old-fashioned knowledge is obsolete. That fresh eyes and modern thinking can overcome 40 years of professional expertise. And if he's wrong, then he'll learn what every other overconfident developer has learned, that sometimes the old ways exist for very good reasons." The sun disappeared behind the horizon, and I went inside to make some more phone calls. Tomorrow, I had appointments with 3 different real estate agents, all of whom had very interesting properties available for immediate purchase. Derek wanted to build his future on Riverside Avenue. Well, I was going to make sure that future included some lessons about respecting the past. The following Wednesday, I drove to Derek's house with a folder full of documents I'd obtained from Tom Brennan, official permit rejection letters, code violation notices, and a detailed breakdown of everything Derek and Kyle needed to fix before they could even think about breaking ground. I told myself I was making one last attempt to help my son avoid disaster. Looking back, I think I was really testing whether any part of him still respected me enough to listen. Lisa answered the door, looking harried. "Hank, Derek didn't mention you were coming by." "Surprise visit," I said, holding up the folder. "I have some information about the cafe permits that I think Derek needs to see." She led me through to the kitchen, where Derek was on his laptop, probably designing social media campaigns for a business that would never exist. Kyle was there too, of course, wearing another expensive casual outfit and typing furiously on his phone. "Dad." Derek looked up with that particular expression of annoyance reserved for unexpected interruptions. "What's this about?" I set the folder on the table and opened it to the first rejection letter. "Derek, your permits have been rejected twice now. These aren't minor technicalities. These are serious code violations that will require major design changes." Kyle looked up from his phone with an expression of amused tolerance. "Uncle Hank, we got this handled. Our architect is addressing the city's concerns. Your architect clearly doesn't understand environmental impact requirements," I said, pulling out the specific violation notice. "You're planning to pave over a natural drainage area that feeds into Riverside Creek. During heavy rains, that runoff will flood the elementary school playground." Derek barely glanced at the documents. "Dad, we have professional environmental consultants handling that stuff. People who actually understand modern environmental science, not 40-year-old guesswork." "This isn't guesswork, son. This is basic hydrology. Water flows downhill. When you eliminate permeable ground cover and replace it with concrete, that water has to go somewhere. Environmental consultants," Kyle repeated, emphasizing each word like he was talking to a child. "Certified professionals with degrees in environmental engineering, not amateur observations about puddles. Amateur observations. I'd personally overseen the installation of the storm drain system that protected this entire neighborhood. But Kyle thought that was amateur observation. Look, I said, trying to stay calm, I'm not trying to undermine your project. I'm trying to help you avoid a very expensive mistake. See the setback violation? You're planning to build within 8 feet of the property line. The code requires 15 feet minimum for commercial structures. Derek snatched the papers away from me. Jesus Christ, Dad, do you hear yourself? You're treating us like we're idiots who can't read a simple building code. I'm treating you like people who are about to lose everything, because you won't listen to someone who knows what he's talking about. Kyle set down his phone and leaned back in his chair with a patronizing smile. Uncle Hank, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but you're working from outdated information. Building codes change. Environmental standards evolve. What might have been true in the Carter administration isn't necessarily relevant today. The Carter administration. Jimmy Carter left office in 1981. I was still working in 2019 when I retired, but apparently Kyle thought I'd been obsolete for 40 years. Besides, Derek added, we've already paid for professional surveys, professional architectural plans, professional environmental assessments. We're not going to throw all that away because you think you spotted something professionals missed. The professionals missed it because they filed incomplete applications. I said, pulling out another document, look at this environmental assessment. It's based on a site survey from 2018, before the city updated the flood zone maps. Your entire project is now in a different risk category. Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. Stop. Just stop. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Having my father show up at my house to lecture me about my business, like I'm some kind of amateur? Derek, I'm trying to save you from what? Success? From proving that I can build something without your help. Derek's voice was getting louder, drawing Lisa back into the kitchen. Don't embarrass yourself with your ancient knowledge, Dad. We hired real professionals. People who actually know what they're doing. Ancient knowledge. Real professionals. The words hit like physical blows. Kyle nodded sympathetically. Look, Uncle Hank, I'm sure you were great at what you did back in your day. But urban planning has evolved tremendously since then. We have computer modeling now, satellite imagery, environmental sensors, digital permitting systems. No offense, but city planning from a Carter administration just isn't exactly relevant to modern development challenges. Lisa had been standing quietly in the doorway, but now she stepped forward. Maybe we should all take a step back here. Hank's just trying to help. Help. Derek laughed bitterly. This isn't help, Lisa. This is him trying to stay relevant by undermining our project. He can't stand that we're doing something successful without his input. I gathered up my documents slowly, feeling Martha's words from the night before echoing in my head. Are you really going to let them fail? Now I had my answer. I wasn't letting them do anything. They were choosing this path, eyes wide open, with full knowledge of the consequences. You're right, Derek, I said quietly. You don't need my input. You have real professionals, modern methods, cutting-edge technology. I'm sure everything will work out exactly as you planned. Kyle beamed. That's the spirit, Uncle Hank. Sometimes you just have to trust the next generation to innovate. Real professionals. I repeated, standing up. Let's see how real they are. Derek's face softened slightly, perhaps hearing something in my tone that suggested I was finally backing down. Dad, I don't want you to take this personally. It's just business, you know? Sometimes you have to make tough decisions about whose advice to follow. I understand completely, I said, walking toward the door. Business decisions, professional judgments, modern approaches. I get it. Lisa followed me to the door. Hank, I'm sorry about. Don't apologize for them, Lisa, I said gently. They're adults. They've made their choice. I was halfway to my car when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Mr. Bellamy? This is Rebecca Hartwell from Riverside Properties. We spoke last week about the lots adjacent to your son's project. I have some very interesting news about property availability in that area. I looked back at Derek's house, where I could see him and Kyle through the kitchen window, probably celebrating their victory over my ancient knowledge and outdated concerns. "I'm listening," I said, getting into my car. The Morrison family just decided to sell their entire block of properties on Riverside Avenue. 8 lots total, including the 2 directly adjacent to your son's cafe location. They want to close quickly within 30 days. Cash buyers preferred. 8 lots. The Morrison family had owned that stretch of Riverside Avenue for 3 generations, but apparently they'd finally decided to cash out, and they were selling to cash buyers, which meant no financing delays, no inspection contingencies, no opportunities for Derek to realize what was happening until it was too late. What kind of timeline are we talking about? I asked. I could show you the properties tomorrow, if you're interested. The family is motivated to sell quickly, and given your background with the city, I think you'd appreciate the development potential. Development potential. Right. Because I was apparently too ancient and irrelevant to understand modern development, but somehow sophisticated enough to recognize a golden opportunity when it fell into my lap. "I'll be there," I said. "And Rebecca, I want to see all 8 lots. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right." After I hung up, I sat in Derek's driveway for a few minutes, watching him and Kyle through the window. They were laughing about something. Probably my pathetic attempt to share my ancient knowledge with the next generation. Real professionals. Modern approaches. Cutting-edge technology. Well, Derek wanted to learn about modern business approaches. I was about to give him a master class in how real professionals handle competition, market positioning, and strategic property acquisition. He thought he was building a cafe. But what he was really building was a foundation for the most expensive education in humility he'd ever received. I started the car and drove home to call Martha. Tomorrow, I had 8 properties to evaluate and a development strategy to plan. Derek and Kyle could keep their modern methods, and they're real professionals. I'd stick with ancient knowledge and obsolete experience. Sometimes the old ways work precisely because they've been tested by time, pressure, and the kind of arrogant young developers who thought rules didn't apply to them. Tomorrow, Derek would start learning why those rules existed, and why experience mattered more than enthusiasm, no matter what generation you belonged to. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Rebecca Hartwell's office, signing the purchase agreement for the first 2 lots adjacent to Derek's cafe site, when my phone exploded with an angry call from my son. "Dad, you need to get down here right now." Derek's voice was so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "These incompetent bureaucrats at City Hall are trying to sabotage our project." I excused myself from Rebecca's office and stepped into the hallway. "What's the problem, Derek?" "They rejected our permits again. For the 3rd time. They're claiming we have fundamental design flaws and environmental violations that require us to start over from scratch." I pulled out the copy of Derek's permit application that Tom Brennan had faxed me that morning. Every single violation was exactly what I'd warned him about 3 weeks earlier. The setback requirements, the drainage issues, the environmental impact on Riverside Creek, the parking insufficiency, everything. What specific violations are they citing? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's all technical bullshit designed to protect their little fiefdom," Derek snapped. "Setback requirements that don't make sense for modern commercial development. Environmental concerns about some drainage ditch that nobody even uses. Parking calculations based on outdated traffic patterns. Some drainage ditch." Riverside Creek had been the primary storm water management system for this neighborhood since 1987. But Derek's modern professionals had apparently missed that detail during their comprehensive environmental assessment. "Derek, these aren't arbitrary requirements. The setback rules exist because some bureaucrat decided to flex his authority." Derek interrupted. "Dad, I need you to make some calls. Use your connections. Talk to whoever you need to talk to and get this sorted out." Now he wanted my connections. Now that his modern professionals and cutting-edge technology had failed, suddenly my ancient knowledge might be useful after all. "What kind of calls did you have in mind?" I asked. "I don't know, whatever it takes. Call the mayor, call the planning director, call whoever you used to work with. Tell them this is harassment. Tell them we're trying to create jobs and they're standing in the way of economic development. The mayor, Derek wanted me to call the mayor and explain that following building codes was harassment. After 3 weeks of telling me my expertise was obsolete, he now wanted me to leverage relationships I'd built over 40 years to fix problems he created by ignoring my advice. Derek, maybe this would be a good time to reconsider some of the design elements. If you just adjust the setbacks and address the drainage issues. We're not changing the design. Derek's voice reached a new octave of indignation. This design is perfect. It's exactly what this neighborhood needs. The problem isn't our project. It's these old-fashioned bureaucrats who can't appreciate innovative thinking. Innovative thinking, like building in a flood zone and calling innovation. Besides, Derek continued, we've already spent everything you gave us on architectural fees and permit applications. If we have to start over, we'll need another $50,000 just to cover the redesign costs. And there it was, the real reason for the call. Derek needed more money to fix the problems he created by not listening to free advice from someone who actually knew what he was talking about. $50,000, I repeated, to redesign a project that could have been done correctly the first time. Look, Dad, I know this is frustrating, but sometimes business investments require additional capital injections when unexpected obstacles arise. Unexpected obstacles, like building codes that have been publicly available for 30 years. And Kyle's okay with you asking for more money? Kyle's already put in his share, Derek said defensively. This is a partnership, and partners support each other when challenges arise. The question is whether you're going to support your son's business or let some petty bureaucrats destroy his dreams. Support your son's business. As if pointing out that water flows downhill was somehow an attack on Derek's dreams rather than an attempt to prevent him from drowning in his own hubris. I'll think about it, I said. Think about it? Dad, we need an answer by tomorrow. The contractor is threatening to walk if we don't resolve the permit issues by Friday. The contractor was threatening to walk because Derek had promised him a start date based on permits he didn't actually have. Another example of Derek's sophisticated business planning. After I hung up, I went back into Rebecca's office and signed the purchase agreement. 2 lots, $180,000 cash, closing in 10 days. By the time Derek figured out what was happening, I'd owned the properties on both sides of his cafe. Excellent choice, Mr. Bellamy, Rebecca said, notarizing the documents. These lots have tremendous potential, especially with the commercial expansion coming down the pipeline. The commercial expansion. The one Derek and Kyle knew nothing about because they were too busy disrupting traditional research methods to actually research the area they were investing in. Any word on when that expansion might be approved? I asked casually. City Council vote is scheduled for next month, Rebecca replied. My contact at City Hall say it's virtually guaranteed to pass. Property values along that corridor are going to triple overnight. Triple overnight. While Derek was fighting to get permits for a cafe that violated half the municipal code, the neighborhood was about to transform into a major commercial district, and I was about to own prime real estate on both sides of his project. I drove home thinking about all the developers I'd watched over the years. The ones who thought they were smarter than zoning laws. The ones who thought connections mattered more than competence. The ones who believed that confidence could overcome ignorance, right up until the moment reality proved them wrong. Derek was following the same pattern, making the same mistakes, displaying the same arrogant certainty that somehow the rules didn't apply to him. The only difference was at this time, the developer was my son. Martha was waiting for me when I got home, holding a cup of coffee and wearing the expression she reserved for serious conversations. Derek called, she said. He told me about the permits and about the $50,000. I hung up my coat and joined her at the kitchen table. What did you tell him? I told him we'd discuss it as a family. She paused, studying my face. But first, I want to know what you're really planning, Hank. You've been making phone calls, meeting with real estate agents, researching properties. This isn't just about teaching Derek a lesson anymore, is it? She was right, of course. It had started as a lesson about respecting experience and following professional advice. But somewhere along the way, it had become something bigger, something more systematic. Derek wants to learn about modern business. I said finally. He wants to prove that his methods are superior to mine, that his generation understands development better than mine does. And I'm going to let him learn. I'm going to give him exactly what he asked for. The freedom to succeed or fail based on his own decisions, his own expertise, his own understanding of how business really works. Martha nodded slowly, without any interference from his obsolete father. Exactly. I pulled out the purchase agreement and set it on the table. But that doesn't mean I have to stand on the sidelines and watch. If Derek wants to play in the big leagues, he's going to discover what it's like when someone with real experience decides to compete against him. She looked at the documents, her eyes widening as she saw the property locations and purchase price. You bought the lots next to this cafe. 2 of them. 6 more are available if I want them. Hank! They thought they were so clever, Martha. Derek and Kyle, with their modern methods and their professional consultants and their connections at City Hall. They thought they could build a business without understanding the market, the regulations, or the competition. I stood up and walked a window, looking out at the neighborhood Derek had dismissed as old-fashioned and obsolete. But I knew their secret. I continued. I knew what they didn't know. I knew what was coming that they couldn't see. And tomorrow, I'm going to start showing them the difference between thinking you understand business and actually understanding business. Martha joined me at the window. What's their secret? I smiled, thinking about the commercial expansion, the property values that were about to skyrocket, and the 8 lots that Derek's Dream Cafe would soon be surrounded by. They don't have one, I said. That's the secret. They think they're playing chess, but they're actually playing checkers. And they don't even know the rules of checkers. Tomorrow, Derek would call again about the $50,000, and I'd have to decide whether to fund his continued education in the expensive realities of modern business development. But either way, the lesson was going to continue, because sometimes the best way to teach someone about respect is to show them what happens when they have to earn it the hard way. I told Derek I needed time to consider his request for additional funding. What I didn't tell him was that I was using that time to purchase the remaining 6 lots on Riverside Avenue and interview potential tenants for the commercial spaces I was planning to develop. 2 weeks later, Martha's sister Carol called with news that made my blood run cold. Hank, I thought you should know that Derek approached my husband about a loan, Carol said, her voice tight with concern. Kevin turned him down, but Derek seemed pretty desperate. He mentioned something about private lenders and high-interest financing. Private lenders. In the development business. That was code for predatory lending operations that charged desperate borrowers interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. I made some calls to my old contacts in the banking community. What I learned confirmed my worst fears. Derek had borrowed $75,000 from Pinnacle Capital Solutions at 18% annual interest, with the cafe equipment and Lisa's cars collateral. Pinnacle was one of those companies that specialize in alternative financing solutions for people who couldn't get traditional bank loans. The kind of lenders who foreclose on family businesses with the efficiency of a military operation. 18%? Martha gasped when I told her, Hank, at that rate, they'll lose everything if the cafe doesn't turn a profit immediately. That's exactly what will happen, I said grimly. Pinnacle gives borrowers just enough rope to hang themselves, then swoops in to claim collateral when they inevitably default. I tried calling Derek to discuss the loan, but he'd apparently decided that avoiding me was easier than explaining his decisions. Lisa finally answered after I called 6 times. Hank, I'm sorry Derek hasn't returned your calls, she said, sounding exhausted. He's under a lot of pressure right now. The permit issues, the construction delays, the financing problems. He's not thinking clearly. Lisa, tell me about this loan from Pinnacle Capital. Long pause. How did you? Never mind. Yes, Derek borrowed money from them. We didn't have a choice. No bank would finance a project with unresolved permit issues, and we needed capital to cover the redesign costs. At 18% interest. Derek says that's temporary. Once we get the permit approved and start generating revenue, we can refinance with traditional lender. Once they got the permits approved, which, based on their latest submission, would happen sometime around the next ice age. Lisa, 18% interest on $75,000 means you're paying over $1,300 a month just in interest charges, before you factor in principal payments, operating expenses, or loan payments to me. I know, she said quietly. I tried to talk Derek out of it, but he said this was our only option. He said his father wasn't supporting the family business, so we had to find other sources of funding. His father wasn't supporting the family business. After providing $150,000 in startup capital, apparently I was now the villain for not throwing good money after bad. Lisa, you need to understand something. Pinnacle Capital doesn't want you to succeed. They want you to fail. They make more money from foreclosures than they do from successful loan repayments. Derek thinks you're just trying to scare us because you're angry about the permit situation. Derek thought I was trying to scare them, while he borrowed money at rates that would make a payday loan company envious. Derek thought my concern was motivated by spite rather than basic financial literacy. After I hung up, I sat in my study, staring at the commercial lease applications I'd been reviewing. 3 different coffee shops wanted to rent space in the properties I was acquiring. All 3 had solid business plans, proper permits, and realistic financial projections. All 3 understood that success in the restaurant business required more than good intentions and social media marketing. Rebecca called that afternoon with an update on my property acquisitions. The Morrison family accepted your offer on the remaining lots, she said. Congratulations, Mr. Bellamy. You now own 8 prime commercial properties on what's about to become the most valuable retail corridor in the city. 8 properties. Enough to control the entire commercial character of the block where Derek was planning his cafe. Enough to determine what kinds of businesses would surround his project, what kinds of customers would be attracted to the area, and what kinds of competition he'd be facing. Any interest from potential tenants? I asked. Tremendous interest. I got 3 coffee roasters who want to open flagship stores, 2 bakeries looking for expansion opportunities, and a gourmet sandwich shop that's been trying to break into this market for years. 3 coffee roasters, all with proper permits, adequate financing, and business models that didn't depend on borrowing money at 18% interest. What kind of timeline are we looking at? The zoning board meets next month to approve the commercial expansion. Once that passes, we can fast-track the permit process for your tenants. You could have businesses open and operating while your son is still fighting for basic approvals. The zoning board. I'd been tracking their agenda for weeks, waiting for the commercial expansion proposal to come up for a vote. What Derek and Kyle didn't know, what their connections at City Hall had somehow failed to mention, was that the expansion had been in the works for 18 months. Property owners along Riverside Avenue had been quietly lobbying for change, anticipating the traffic and economic development it would bring. Martha found me that evening in the garage, where I was reviewing architectural plans for the commercial spaces I was planning to develop. "You're really going through with this," she said, looking at the blueprint spread across my workbench. "Derek made his choice," I replied. "He chose to treat my expertise as interference, my advice as harassment, and my financial support as an entitlement. Now he's borrowing money from predators because he'd rather pay 18% interest to strangers than accept help from his father. But what if this destroys him completely? What if he loses everything?" I looked at the plans for the coffee roastery that would be opening 2 doors down from Derek's cafe. Professional design, proper permits, realistic budget, experienced management. Everything Derek's project lacked. "Then he'll learn what I've been trying to teach him," I said. "That success in business requires more than enthusiasm and social media campaigns. That experience matters. That rules exist for good reasons. That respect is earned, not demanded." Martha picked up one of the lease applications, scanning the financial projections and business plan. "These other coffee shops, they're going to put Derek out of business before he even opens." "Only if Derek's business model can't compete with theirs," I said. "If he's right about his modern approach and innovative thinking, then he should have no problem succeeding in a competitive marketplace. And if he's wrong, then he'll discover what every other overconfident developer discovers when they think the rules don't apply to them." My phone buzzed with a text message from Tom Brennan. "Zoning board vote moved up to next week. Commercial expansion proposal expected to pass unanimously. Thought you should know. Next week." The commercial expansion that would transform Riverside Avenue from a quiet residential street into a bustling retail corridor would be approved next week. Property values would skyrocket. Development opportunities would multiply. And Derek would still be fighting for permits to build a cafe that violated half the municipal code. If only they knew what I'd found out about the zoning board. If only Derek and Kyle understood that their innovative thinking was about to collide with the kind of large-scale economic forces that didn't care about social media campaigns or networking connections. But they'd made it clear that they didn't want my insights, my connections, or my old-fashioned knowledge. They wanted to learn through experience rather than expertise. Well, they were about to get more experience than they bargained for. Because next week, when the zoning board approved the commercial expansion, Derek would discover that sometimes the most expensive education comes from refusing free advice from people who actually know what they're talking about. Martha squeezed my shoulder. Are you sure about this? I looked at the development plans, the lease applications, and the financial projections that would turn Riverside Avenue into exactly the kind of thriving commercial district Derek claimed he wanted to be part of. I'm sure, I said. Derek wanted to prove he could succeed without his father's help. Now he's going to get the chance to prove it in the most competitive environment possible. Next week, everything would change. And Derek would learn that in the development business, timing isn't just important, it's everything. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was meeting with the architects designing the commercial spaces for my 8 Riverside Avenue properties. Derek's voice was different this time. Not angry, not condescending, but desperate in a way that made my chest tighten with unwanted paternal concern. Dad, we need to talk. Can you come over? It's important. I found Derek and Lisa sitting at their kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of bills, loan documents, and what looked like eviction notices. Derek's face was pale, stubbled, and hollow-eyed. Lisa had been crying. The Pinnacle loan payment is due next week, Derek said, without preamble. $1,350. Plus we owe the architect another $8,000 for the permit redesign. Plus the contractor wants $15,000 up front before he'll even consider rescheduling. I sat down across from them, noting how thin Derek had become, how the confident arrogance had been replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. And your current cash flow situation? Lisa answered. We have about $400 in checking. Derek's freelance work dried up because he's been spending all his time on the cafe. My salon hours got cut because the owner's struggling too. So you need approximately $25,000 to stay afloat. I said. More than that, Derek replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The permit rejections keep coming. Our lawyer says we need to completely start over with a new design, new environmental assessments, new everything. We're looking at another 6 months minimum before we can even think about opening. 6 months. At 18% interest on $75,000, Derek will be paying over $8,000 in interest alone during that period, plus living expenses, plus my loan payments, plus the mounting costs of permit applications that kept getting rejected for the same fundamental flaws I'd warned them about from the beginning. Dad, Derek said, and I heard something break in his voice. I need to ask you something, and I know it's a lot. Here it comes, I thought, the moment when pride finally collides with reality. You could downsize, Derek said, the words tumbling out in a rush. This house is way too big for you, and Mom anyway. You could sell it, buy something smaller, and use the equity to help family instead of being selfish about some old house. The old house. The home where Martha and I had raised Derek, where we'd celebrate his birthdays and graduations, where we planned to live out our retirement. The house that represented 43 years of marriage and 40 years of career success. Derek wanted me to sell it to fund his failing cafe. You want me to sell our family home? I said slowly. It's just a house, Dad. Family is more important than real estate. You always taught me that. Derek's desperation was making him cruel in ways I didn't think he was capable of. You could help us save the business, or you could choose money over family. It's really that simple. Choose money over family. After providing $150,000 in startup capital, after offering free professional advice that could have prevented every problem they were facing, I was now being accused of choosing money over family because I wouldn't liquidate my retirement security to fund Derek's continued incompetence. Lisa was staring at her hands, clearly uncomfortable with Derek's ultimatum, but not willing to contradict him. Derek, I said carefully, before we discuss selling houses, maybe we should talk about why your cafe project has been such a disaster. It hasn't been a disaster, Derek snapped, some of his old fire returning. It's been sabotaged by an incompetent city bureaucracy that doesn't understand modern development. Or, I said, standing up slowly, it's been a disaster because you ignored every piece of professional advice you were offered by someone who actually understands development. I walked to their window and looked out at Riverside Avenue, where construction crews were already preparing for the infrastructure upgrades that would accompany the commercial expansion. Derek, do you know what's happening to this neighborhood? What do you mean? I turned back to face them. I mean, do you have any idea what's coming to Riverside Avenue? What's been planned for the past 18 months while you were busy disrupting traditional planning processes? Derek and Lisa exchanged confused glances. The city council approved the Riverside commercial expansion last week. I said, unanimously, this quiet residential street is about to become a major retail corridor. Property values are going to triple. Development opportunities are going to explode. And you've been fighting for permits to build a small cafe while the biggest economic transformation in this neighborhood's history has been happening around you. Derek's face went white. That's impossible. Kyle's connections would have told us about something like that. Kyle's connections, I said with a bitter laugh, are probably junior staff members who know less about city planning than you do, which frankly isn't saying much. I pulled out my phone and showed them the official announcement from the city website. Commercial expansion approved. Retail development fast-tracked. Infrastructure improvements beginning immediately. Property tax assessments to be updated within 60 days. Lisa was the first to understand the implications. The property taxes, if the values triple, you'll be paying taxes on land worth 3 times what you thought it was worth. I confirmed. Plus interest on a $75,000 loan that's bleeding you dry, plus lease payments on a space that's about to be surrounded by professional, well-funded competitors. Derek was reading the announcement over and over, as if staring at it long enough would make it say something different. But this is good news, right? He said desperately. If property values are going up, that means more foot traffic, more customers, more competition. I interrupted. Derek, do you want to know what I've been doing for the past 6 weeks while you've been learning about modern development the hard way? I pulled out the folder containing my property acquisition documents and lease agreements. I bought 8 lots on Riverside Avenue, every available property adjacent to and surrounding your cafe location. I now control the entire commercial character of this block. Derek stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. And I've leased those properties to 3 coffee roasters, 2 bakeries, and a gourmet sandwich shop, all of them with proper permits, adequate financing, and business models that don't depend on 18% predatory loans. The color drained completely from Derek's face. You bought the lots around our cafe? I bought the lots around your cafe. I leased them to your competition. And when they open in 3 months with professional management and proper permits, your little coffee shop is going to be completely irrelevant. Lisa was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match played with hand grenades. Every single business problem you've encountered, I continued, every permit rejection, every code violation, every environmental concern, I warned you about all of it. I tried to help you avoid every expensive mistake you've made. And you responded by telling me my expertise was obsolete, my advice was harassment, and my knowledge was ancient. Derek was shaking his head slowly, like he could deny reality through sheer force of will. So I gave you exactly what you asked for, I said. I let you learn about modern development without interference from someone whose time had passed. I let you discover what happens when enthusiasm meets experience, when confidence collides with competence, when arrogance encounters actual expertise. I gathered up my documents and headed for the door. You wanted to prove you could succeed without your father's help, I said. Congratulations, Derek. You're about to get exactly what you wished for. As I reached the door, Derek called out behind me, his voice breaking with desperation. Dad, wait. We can work together on this. We can be partners. We can... Partners? I turned back to face him one last time. Derek, partners respect each other. Partners listen to each other. Partners don't treat each other like obsolete ATMs. I looked at Lisa, who was crying quietly into her hands. You have 4 days before your pinnacle payment is due, I said. I suggest you use that time to figure out whether you want to cut your losses now or wait for my tenants to put you out of business after you open. I left them sitting in their kitchen, surrounded by bills they couldn't pay and dreams they never had the competence to achieve. The old house Derek wanted me to sell was looking pretty good right about now. After all, it was paid for, properly maintained, and wouldn't require me to borrow money at 18% interest to keep it. Unlike some people's business ventures, my home was built on a solid foundation. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office above Riverside Roasters, the flagship coffee shop that now occupied the lot where Derek had originally planned to build his cafe, when Martha brought me the morning mail. 3 envelopes caught my attention immediately. Rent checks from my commercial tenants, each one representing the thriving businesses that had transformed Riverside Avenue into exactly the kind of vibrant commercial district Derek had claimed he wanted to create. The Hendersons sent a thank you note with their rent payment, Martha said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Their bakery is booked solid through the holidays. They want to expand into the adjacent space if it becomes available. I looked out the window at the bustling street below. The commercial expansion had exceeded even my expectations. Property values had quadrupled instead of tripling. The morning foot traffic was so heavy that the city had to install new crosswalks. And in the middle of it all, taking up a corner of what should have been Derek's cafe, was a small storage unit that my son rented for me for $400 a month. Derek had defaulted on the Pinnacle loan after 3 months. Just as I predicted, Pinnacle had seized his equipment and Lisa's car with the efficiency of a military operation. The cafe had never served a single cup of coffee, but Derek was still making monthly payments to me for the storage space where he kept a few pieces of equipment Pinnacle hadn't wanted. He's here, Martha said, nodding toward the window. I looked down to see Derek walking slowly past the bustling cafes and bakeries, carrying a box of what looked like promotional materials for a business that would never exist. He did this every few weeks, some combination of masochism and denial that drew him back to the scene of his failure like a moth to a flame. My phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the caller ID. Dad, I was just in the neighborhood, Derek said, his voice carrying that forced casualness of someone pretending an encounter wasn't planned. I was wondering if we could talk. About what? About maybe working together on some of these properties. I mean, I was the one who identified this location as having potential. I was the one who saw the vision for what this street could become. Maybe we could partner on future developments. I was the one who identified this location. Derek had spent months fighting every aspect of developing this location, but now that it was successful, he wanted to claim credit for choosing it. You want to partner with me? I said. It makes sense, doesn't it? Your experience, my vision, working together to create something amazing. We could develop the other properties, expand the retail offerings, really maximize the potential of this commercial district. My vision, the vision that had included violating setback requirements, ignoring environmental regulations, and building in a flood zone. The vision that had required 18% predatory loans and had ultimately produced nothing but debt and failure. Derek, come up to my office. Let's discuss this face to face. 5 minutes later, Derek was sitting in the same chair Martha had vacated, looking around my office with a mixture of awe and resentment. Through the windows, he could see the coffee roasters, bakeries, and sandwich shops that occupied the properties I'd purchased while he'd been learning about modern development. This is quite a setup you have here, Dad, Derek said, trying to sound impressed rather than bitter. You really capitalized on a commercial expansion. Capitalized on the commercial expansion, as if it had been luck rather than 40 years of experience reading municipal development patterns. I did my research, I said simply. Right, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. We could do more of this. There are other neighborhoods that are ripe for development, other opportunities where we could get in early and really make something special happen. We could do more of this. Derek wanted to partner with me on future developments after spending months telling me my expertise was obsolete and my advice was harassment. Derek, do you remember what you told me about my ancient knowledge? His face flushed. Dad, I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean. You know how it is when you're under pressure. Do you remember what Kyle said about city planning from the Carter administration? Kyle was wrong about a lot of things. I realize it now. Do you remember demanding that I sell my house to fund your failed cafe? Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That was a desperate moment. I wasn't thinking clearly. You have to understand, we were facing bankruptcy, and you thought I should liquidate my retirement security to cover the cost of your refusing to listen to free professional advice. Dad, please, can we move past all that? I've learned from my mistakes. I understand now that your experience is valuable. That's why I want us to work together. My experience is valuable. Now that Derek needed something from me. Suddenly my 4 decades of professional expertise weren't quite so ancient and irrelevant. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder containing Derek's rent payment history for the storage unit. Derek, you've been paying me $400 a month for 6 months to store the remnants of your failed business. I said, that's $2,400 you've paid me in rent. Do you know how much my commercial tenants pay me per month? Derek shook his head. Riverside Roasters pays me $4,000. The Henderson Bakery pays $3,500. Morrison Sandwich Shop pays $3,000. In 6 months, my tenants have paid me $63,000 in rent. Professional businesses run by competent people who understand how to succeed in a competitive marketplace. I closed the folder and looked directly at Derek. You want to know the difference between you and them? They listened when someone with experience offered advice. They followed building codes. They obtained proper permits. They secured reasonable financing. They treated development like a business instead of a social media fantasy. Derek was staring at his hands, the fight completely gone out of him. I gave you advice. I continued. You paid me with silence. Now you pay me rent. Dad, I know I screwed up. I know I was arrogant and stupid and disrespectful. But can't we find a way to move forward? Can't you forgive me? Forgive him. Derek wanted forgiveness for treating me like an obsolete ATM, for dismissing 40 years of expertise as ancient knowledge, for demanding that I sell my home to fund his incompetence. Derek, forgiveness isn't the issue, I said. Trust is the issue. Partnership requires trust. And trust is earned through consistent, respectful behavior over time, not through desperate pleas when you need something. I stood up and walked to a window, looking down at the thriving commercial district that Derek could have been part of if he'd had the wisdom to listen instead of the arrogance to lecture. You wanted to prove you could succeed without your father's help, I said. You got exactly what you wanted. You succeeded in proving that enthusiasm without expertise leads to failure. That confidence without competence leads to bankruptcy. That modern approaches without understanding fundamental principles lead to disaster. Derek stood up slowly, understanding that the conversation was over. So that's it? You're just going to let me fail completely. I'm not letting you do anything, Derek. You're an adult who made adult choices and face adult consequences. The storage unit is yours as long as you keep paying rent. The lessons you've learned are yours to keep forever. And the knowledge that your father tried to help you avoid all of this is something you'll have to live with. As Derek reached the door, I called out one last time. Oh, and Derek, if you ever decide you want to learn about development instead of disrupting it, if you ever want to listen instead of lecture, if you ever want to show respect instead of demanding it, call me. I'll still be here. Still obsolete. Still ancient. Still knowing more about this business than you'll ever understand. Derek left without saying goodbye. Through my window, I watched him walk past the successful businesses that surrounded his empty failure, past the customers and foot traffic and economic vitality that he could have been part of. Martha joined me at the window as Derek disappeared around the corner. Do you think he learned anything? She asked. I looked at the rent check from Riverside Roasters, thinking about the monthly payments that would continue for years to come, each one a reminder of the difference between respecting experience and dismissing it. He learned that actions have consequences. I said, he learned that expertise matters. He learned that sometimes the old ways work precisely because they've been tested by time and pressure and arrogant young developers who thought rules didn't apply to them. And most importantly, I added, watching the afternoon crowd fill the sidewalks of commercial district I'd built while Derek was learning about modern failure. He learned that when you bite the hand that feeds you, sometimes that hand stops feeding you and starts collecting rent instead. The late afternoon sun painted Riverside Avenue gold, highlighting the thriving businesses and satisfied customers and economic success that filled every storefront except one small storage unit in the corner. It was, I had to admit, a pretty satisfying view. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your opinions of this story in the comments. To listen to more stories, click on one of the boxes showing on your screen. Thank you for watching.